Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis Gianoutsos. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
I started off with a degree in law, so that set the foundation for me, and then promptly never became a lawyer. So that was interesting. What I've done is use the law degree as a really solid foundation to get into employment relations, bargaining work, and to understand and to have a good understanding of law has been a foundation for that. But it's also been an opportunity to engage with a wide range of organizations, and it's given me the opportunity to eventually then get into leadership development, and particularly around supporting leaders to be the best that they can be.
Awesome. Very good. And of course, you and I are in lockdown at the moment and in the country of New Zealand right now. And so really interesting how you shared that you studied law, but you didn't actually become a lawyer. That's really interesting to hear, but you've taken those skill sets, that background, that foundation to help you go and do the other things around employment law and so forth. And we'll talk about employees soon as well, a little bit later on in today's episode. How did you get into leadership?
I had two really significant experiences that provided the pathway. The first was that my early career work involved bargaining in both the state and the private sector, especially in the New Zealand context with what we called national awards, which were really distinct and distant from the actual workplace relationships. I later worked with New Zealand Breweries, which became Lion Nathan, a reasonably well-known organization around the world. It's been in various parts of the world along the way. And what I experienced there was, and why I loved being there, was because it gave me the opportunity to build the more direct engagement between leaders in the organization and workers in the organization, as distinct from the old national award system, which would line up a bunch of union officials on one side and a bunch of industry officials on the other side. And as I remember, one industry official who was a bit of a grumpy truck driver, a truck owning company, he just said, "Well, when are we going to talk about the drivers and the trucks that they drive?" That kind of really clear message that it's about the relationships on the job. It's not about all the other stuff that's very distant from the workplace. So that was a really strong indication and a really strong experience for me to bring about change in the way that people engage with each other. The second experience was that in 1992, about 13 years into my career, I had the opportunity to attend an IAS, which is the name of the organization that ran it, an IAS Genesis leadership program. And that program really consolidated for me the power of purpose, vision, and action as a direction for creating success. Now, I was always very strongly connected to my own personal purpose, but what the program really consolidated with me was that, if you like, that triumvirate that starts with purpose, goes to vision, and then leads to action. So from those experiences, I eventually founded my own consulting business, which is now continuing after it just about to reach its 30th anniversary.
Oh, wow.
And I'm now in a situation where I'm the founder director, but I've got a chief executive leading the business, and it gives me space and time to do the stuff that I love to do. The second thing that it enabled me to do is to then go on and work with IAS, and specifically the guy that founded IAS, a man by the name of Brian Martin, who had been a very successful international leader in Japan and China and Hong Kong and various places. So I'm working with Brian around leadership development programs, both in New Zealand and internationally. And that taught me a huge amount in terms of not only was I able to share my facilitation of leadership development, but I also engaged with a huge range of leaders, both in New Zealand and in Asia. That has taught me a huge amount about leadership. And every single program that I am engaged with, every single coaching assignment that I engage with teaches me, as well as giving me the opportunity to assist and facilitate leaders to be the best that they can be. So that's how I got into leadership. And what's been fabulous is that the work that I do in employment relations and building relationships in that environment, and the work that I do in leadership development just cross paths beautifully.
Yeah.
So I use stories from each in that context to really drive success.
Do you think that we have issues within the businesses nowadays because of the poor or lack of strong leadership or effective leadership that may actually cause problems? And there we have some issues around employment relations.
Oh, absolutely. I'll give you a couple of examples. I'm dealing with an organization right now. Because it's live right now, I won't refer to the name of it. But what we're doing in there is that we have an interest-based approach. So we are we've identified what are the shared issues that the union and the employer has, and we're working our way through those shared issues. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get an early agreement or a consensus around those issues, but it is a better way of doing it rather than a positional, I'll tell you what I want, you tell me what you want, and then we'll bash it out between us. To me, and it's interesting because whilst we're in this lockdown on Zoom and doing so much over Zoom, we spent 4 hours together today, not sitting in separate rooms sorting out what our next position is, but we actually spent 4 hours talking to each other and listening to each other. So I think that's a critical issue. Yet another example, I've got another client that is totally into positional bargaining, low trust, and always worried about what the union will do next. And the sad thing about that is that it's probable that I'm about to share with that client that actually that's not the way I like to do business. That's not the way that I like to lead. And even after 15 years of working with them, I may just say, I think you need to find a different voice, someone that's got a different approach, because clearly we're not connected.
Yeah, and it's amazing how a lot of leaders have a fear of something, or they don't want something to happen, and then it starts to happen because you're attracting it. That's what you're thinking about. That's what you So be careful how you're actually thinking about things. I think is quite an interesting way to look at it, right?
Because you'll bring it into being.
Yeah, exactly.
If you show low trust, you'll get low trust.
Well, there you go. Yeah. And trust is a big thing. That is huge. And I'm sure it's like that in the bargaining side of things, but in leadership development that we've seen, just running your own business, our businesses, and being part of director of other companies, I think trust is a huge thing that we need to see leaders actually have and build over time. And Paul, I know what I've seen is that trust does take time to develop. But boy, it can go out the window so quickly.
You know, around leadership, I would tell you, I have had the privilege of being led and mentored by some great leaders, mostly unknowns. And then I was raised for several years by my mother and grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came up we were very poor, and it humbled you. And I say, some people, I say I had a choice. I was in quicksand, and I had to lead myself out of it.
Right.
And obviously I had some help. So people have and still come from tougher times, but it was tough as a youngster. And I think it really taught me the value of many things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Many things.
Yeah, cool. And so it's amazing how a lot of our backgrounds and our lives and that, especially when we start younger as kids, and that start to shape us for the future, and those kind of experiences would have helped you. How did you get into leadership? What was the thing that sort of drove you into leadership?
Gosh, it's funny. When I get asked that question, I always say the same thing. I felt like I came out of the womb and was forced to be a leader.
Yeah, forced to be a leader.
Because I'm one of 6 and everybody was working to make a living to bring us up. And so I was on my own a lot. So I had to figure things out real early. And but true leadership once started for me in high school, probably. I got involved. I was a class president. Wasn't really political, but the class president. So I had to lead my class for 4 years and do all of those things. And it was not natural for me. I debate that with people all the time because some people say there's such thing as a natural born leader. I don't believe that, but I think you can be born into it, just like you can get promoted into a leadership position. And then obviously in the corporate world, I got selected into what they called a leadership, advanced leadership program, because the banking world, the company I went to work with then really felt like they needed to develop more leaders and they needed to do it quickly. So it was a very accelerated leadership program.
Okay.
And it was interesting because when I talk about my book, Boss or Leader, I tell stories from those days because they made me circulate around the country and work with different leaders over a 2-year period. And so I really was able to separate a boss from a leader.
So were those days like you were a young graduate that came into the organization and they were wanting you to go around in a rotation throughout the organization to experience different leadership, to experience different parts of the business and so forth? And when you saw the difference between a boss and a leader, what was probably one of the biggest things that sort of stood out for you, the difference between a boss and a leader?
Values. Values, which is why I spend so much time on values-based leadership and values-based leadership coaching, because I found that to be the biggest difference. What do they value? And that answer doesn't always have to be just people, right? It's because I feel like I got to see one person who pretty much just valued money, right? And he was a total boss. And the only reason why people wanted to work for him was because if you worked for him, you made a lot of money too.
Right.
But behind the scenes, obviously, I don't think people were using the term value, but they were saying a lot of things behind the scenes about him. So they didn't respect and like the man.
Okay. So they got things across the line and helped the organization and help him make money, but in turn, they made money as well. So it probably goes along the lines of Zig Ziglar, right? If you help enough people get what they want, you can get what you want. Right. However, what I'm saying is probably his approach, the way he did things, probably wasn't that good in the sense of respect or helping people move forward.
Yeah, he was tough. And he wasn't a relationship guy. So it was all about work. It was all about money. And it wasn't even the awards for him. It was the money. So I saw that pretty quickly. And then as I continue the story, then I worked for a gentleman who handpicked me to come work with him at the organization. I don't know why, even to this day, and he's passed now, that mentored me like crazy on leadership. And he never used the word leadership that I can remember, but he just really poured into me. And his style was really neat and simple, but yet direct. And you felt even when he was correcting you, or even when I might have made a mistake and he needed to talk to me and have that talk with me, I still felt that he really cared about me. And it made a huge difference. And people really respected him. I'd never heard, and as a large organization, I never heard anyone say a bad word about him. And his values were strong. And it was a big, I was so blessed to work with that man. Really.
Yeah, sounds wonderful, man. And the sense that he took you under his wing and he developed you. And it's really interesting how a lot of people don't make a big song and dance about the fact that it's leadership and I'm going to develop you, but it was a way of becoming and going that way. Is that, how would you call it?
Yeah, I would say, yeah. And the interesting part there was that when he passed, I ended up getting promoted into his position. So it was almost a legacy piece. It was almost a legacy piece too, right? So it was one of those things he plucked me out of the boss world and brought me into the leadership world. I still love to tell that story.
It's amazing how a person can make a difference to us as individuals. And when I work with leaders as well, Dave, I asked that question. So if that's how he treated you, what would people say about you? What would people say about you as a leader, as their leader? What would they say behind closed doors or behind in the company as well? And it's really interesting because we always talk about other leaders and what leaders have done to us and how they work with us, but we also should ask the question about how others perceive us, because I think that's quite an important thing for us to look at.
Yeah. Which is another reason why I'll use this word values so much and with my coaching clients, especially, is that people don't have to agree with what you value, completely agree with it to follow you.
Mm-hmm.
But they really need to agree you're a person of value. You have some set values, right? You have some set values. And I try to live them out as best as I can. And even if anybody follow me in social media right away, what I value. You could go on my social media pages and probably within 10 to 15 minutes go, here's his top 5 values. And I don't spell them out.
Yeah. And I think that's really important for people to understand where you stand in your values as a leader. I don't know. And this is going to sound ironic as well, because we're all wearing masks at the moment because of pandemic. But I think a lot of people hide behind the title, hide behind a mask. And in particular, Dave, some countries, especially out probably Asia and so forth, they tend to want to save face, and they're very much that subservient kind of environment. So they're very careful in what they say, how they say it, and so forth. And I think that's really interesting to see how different environments are for different leaders and different organizations for sure.
Absolutely. The two of us are blessed. We travel the world with and work with other leaders, so we get to see all the different cultural differences. And it's really, I've learned so much from that. I've learned so much from other leaders. I just totally buy into, to be a good leader, you have to be a good follower.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.